People say the sky belongs to dreamers. Me? I belong to the ones who stay awake 3 nights straight, patching a failing system so the sky doesn't come crashing down. My name is Avery Morales, 38, Latina, and the head of Flight Systems Coordination at Skybridge Air in Denver, which basically means I sit in a windowless room with no sunlight, no romance, and nothing remotely poetic. The place looks more like a bunker than an operations center. Its signature scent is a mix of burnt coffee, warm wiring, and a mild sense of existential despair. And I love it, or at least I used to. I grew up in the sound of jet engines. My dad spent 40 years wrenching on planes, the kind of man who inhaled more jet fuel fumes than actual oxygen. My mom worked ground ops, the kind of woman who could recall flight numbers more accurately than most people remember their relatives' birthdays. So I never really had a choice. Aviation wasn't a career, it was an inheritance, the same way caffeine stays permanently in the bloodstream of every operations tech I've ever met. When I was a kid, I used to sit by the airport fence and watch 737 jets roar into the sky. I thought they were steel whales, free and unstoppable. My dad would look at me and laugh. Kid, planes are only free because someone on the ground keeps them from dying. I didn't get it then. But once I stepped into this line of work, I realized how terrifyingly right he was. Our workspace is known as the System Operations Center. Cold neon lights, red and blue lines scrolling across monitors, like the heartbeat of some half-sleeping creature. And honestly, that's exactly what it is. Pulse Core, our main operating system, is a Frankenstein of legacy code stitched together by 3 generations of programmers, 2 retired, 1 dead since 2011. It runs on 6 phases, each one crucial, each one fragile, like an aging mechanical heart trying its best to keep pumping even though every artery is clogged with rust. One wrong touch, and the rhythm collapses. And then so does the airline. That morning, snow was falling so heavily it looked like someone dumped baking soda across the Rockies. Weather alert screens were screaming red. I walked into the System Operations Center at 4:20 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee so black it looked like engine oil. I sat down in front of my monitors, pulse core flashing, cycling, jittering. A pilot from Salt Lake called in about severe crosswinds. Another flight from Phoenix reported a bird strike, feathers jammed in the thermal sensors. I handled it all, one issue after another, fingers flying across the keyboard like a firefighter working a hose line. By 5:40, the taxiways were buried, but I had already diverted 2 flights to Colorado Springs, rerouted 3 to Albuquerque, and filed a temporary note to keep the Federal Aviation Administration from blowing a gasket. People think planes fly because of engines. They don't. They fly because people like me spend every minute stitching chaos back into order. That's when the night shift tech approached me, clutching a cup of hot cocoa with a face pale enough to pass for a ghost. He said the one sentence I have heard 100 times, but never like hearing. Pulse core is flagging phase 4 lag again. I nodded. No panic. It does that sometimes, like an old man forgetting which lung to breathe with, but normally I soothe it back to normal. I typed a long string of commands and glanced at the traffic board. Morning flights stacked up like ants on sugar. Another morning in paradise. Another reminder that I am the last link between order and disaster. And the sad truth is, no one notices a link until it breaks. Rick, a pilot out of Boise, messaged me. Avery, if this company ever lets you go, I will land my plane on the runway to protest. I texted back, try it, and the Federal Aviation Administration will ground you until you are 80. But I still smiled. People in the industry respected me. They understood the craft. You only respect what you know can't be learned in a 3-day crash course. I checked the pulse core phase tracker. Phase 2 was slowing down now. Nothing unusual, just a system that felt older today than yesterday. I nudged it with a few lines of code I wrote myself. Off the books, unacknowledged. But Skybridge had survived 12 years because of them. 12 years of crises in the palm of my hand. But that morning, under the washed-out neon lights and the sound of wind hammering against the windows, I felt something. A pressure. A shadow. A storm that wasn't on any weather radar. A rumor had been floating all week. One I pretended didn't bother me. A board meeting with no explanation. A chief executive talking about refreshing our strategy. I have been in this industry long enough to know that whenever executives say refresh, what they really mean is replace, usually with someone younger, someone agreeable, someone who doesn't know enough to question when something is broken. I close my eyes for a few seconds, not from exhaustion, from instinct. They joke that women have a sixth sense. I don't know about that, but 12 years in operations has given me a kind of radar. I feel big disruptions before they hit, and today my radar was screaming. Something was coming, not for the system, for me. I opened my eyes, staring at the blinking lights, the heartbeat of an old beast clawing through another day. And I laughed. Not a real laugh, the kind you let out when you know you are standing at the edge of a storm no one else can smell yet. Speaking of storms, you are hearing this from somewhere calmer than my morning. I'm sure. Maybe you are on a couch, stuck in traffic, or halfway across the country. Tell me where you are listening from. I actually want to know. Every time someone out there cares enough to follow the madness of aviation, I feel a little less alone. And if you are the type who likes smart revenge, payback done with brains, not fists, you are in the right place. Hit follow or subscribe or whatever button your screen shows you. Just don't disappear before I reach the part where everything catches fire. Because this is only the opening act. The real storm, it is already standing right behind me. I was standing by the coffee machine, trying to convince it not to commit suicide again, when the system operations center door flew open like someone had kicked it in. The cold from the hallway spilled inside, along with a wave of expensive perfume that smelled exactly like I'm here to ruin everyone's peace. I didn't need to turn around to know what was happening. The thing my instincts had been warning me about since dawn had finally shown its face. Julian Cross walked in first, early 30s, hair slicked with precision, gray coat perfectly pressed, looking like he just stepped out of a luxury watch commercial. He was the kind of man you could identify in one glance. Born in a VIP suite, schooled at the top, carrying an MBA that sparkled brighter than his experience. The son of Skybridge Air's chief executive, unofficial heir to the company, and now newly appointed chief transformation officer, a title that sounded like it existed specifically to turn problems into creative concepts. Behind him came Madison Hale. If Julian was cold wind, Madison was a blinding LED light, shining straight into your eyes at 7 in the morning after a sleepless night. A multi-million follower influencer who taught breathing meditation, frequency alignment, energy cleansing, and 30 other things that older executives were weirdly easier to fool with than you would expect. She had made a fortune from a 3-day livestream course on healing corporate culture through consciousness, enough to convince gullible companies she actually knew anything about operations. Madison flashed a smile so wide I worried her face might tear. The first thing she did wasn't greet the crew managing 20 flights at once. She lifted her phone, started a live stream, and said in a syrupy voice, "We're standing inside the heart of all operational miracles. Everyone. Today, we're going to raise the frequency of an entire airline together." For the first time in the System Operations Center's history, 3 technicians stopped working at the same moment and exchanged a look that said, "Are we dreaming?" Julian stood in the middle of the room, scanning everything like he was evaluating his family's real estate portfolio. I was seated at the main console, screens flashing red and green nonstop. He walked toward me, hand extended like a talk show host. "Avery Morales, right. The one who keeps this airline's heart beating." "I've heard a lot about you." I shook his hand, polite but cold. "We're in a mid-snowstorm today, Julian. The heart's beating a little fast." Julian smiled with the confidence of someone who has never suffered real consequences. Then I came at the perfect time. "We're about to change quite a lot. Refresh. Modernize. You understand." I did. I understood too well. People who say refresh are usually people who have never done the gritty work themselves. Madison materialized beside him, still holding her phone like everyone here had time to join a live coaching session. She pointed at the pulse core screen as if she were reading a horoscope. "Oh, look at that. Green energy. Beautiful. That means everything is balanced, right?" "No," I said. "That's a phase 2 lag warning. It means the system is about to run slower than a turtle with arthritis, but I can fix it." Madison typed something into her notes, nodding as she'd just reached enlightenment, clearly understanding none of it. She looked at me with the expression of someone trying to force their narrative onto reality. I like your energy, Avery, but you need to soften. Don't use negative language. We don't want to attract risk toward us. I almost said that risk doesn't need to be attracted because it finds me every day on its own. But I kept my mouth shut. Julian clapped once, signaling Madison's camera crew to start filming. We're here to introduce Skybridge Reborn, a new era, a new culture, a new work philosophy. Everything optimized, connected, and elevating the team's frequency. I swear he actually said that. I sat there and watched chaos slowly crawl into the system like a new parasite being released into the garden. Julian unveiled his plan to overhaul operations with a new dashboard called Luminova, something that looked like a tech toy for adults. Flashy, colorful, utterly useless if the input data was wrong. They talked excitedly about a bright future, about automation replacing human instinct, about intuition becoming unnecessary. I looked at the routing board, where a flight from San Diego needed a gate change because of crosswinds, and thought automation divorced from reality will kill people faster than the weather ever could. The atmosphere in the operations center shifted. Staff watched quietly, skeptical, but careful not to show it. They knew people like Julian and Madison, the kind who arrived with glamorous energy and left a trail of consequences that people like me had to clean up afterward. I kept calm, wearing the practiced smile of someone who has lived long enough to know that sometimes the smartest thing is to let people run straight into a wall so they finally understand the value of airbags. And while Julian continued preaching about his glorious future vision, that instinct from this morning pulsed again, a familiar sting, the warning that something unpleasant was about to unfold. And this time it wasn't coming from the weather, it was coming from the two smiling faces standing in front of me. None of us knew it yet, but this was the day the airline walked straight into the biggest storm of its life. Julian and Madison needed only 2 days to turn the System Operations Center from a serious command hub into a cheap stage version of a spiritual wealth workshop. And somehow I ended up thrown into the role of Madison's reluctant tutor. She started her morning by appearing beside my desk at 6 a.m., hair curled, lip gloss shining, phone lifted with the front camera on. She spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. Avery, today I officially learned Pulse Core. You teach me. And she said the word learn with the tone of someone who buys books just to place them on a coffee table, not someone who wants to understand a system that could bankrupt an airline if handled wrong. I took a long breath. All right, Pulse Core is a little complicated. Madison immediately shoved her phone closer to my face. Perfect. Everyone, today I'm learning aviation tech. Let's elevate our knowledge frequency together. I clenched my jaw. I tried explaining the basics: 6 cycles, phase signals, functional tiers, but every 3 sentences, Madison cut in with something absurd, like asking whether PulseCore could sense negative energy or why the interface didn't have pink. The peak moment was when she asked to put rainbow stickers on the dashboard to help her track vibes. My patience lasted 40 minutes. After that, I told her to grab some water and quietly locked the temporary access account Julian had given her. Not out of malice, out of professional self-defense. But the real trouble began when Julian walked up to my desk with a face that said, I'm about to say something very stupid, but I think it's brilliant. Avery, I want you to transfer all the custom code you've written for PulseCore. I need it to integrate into the Luminova dashboard. I turned my chair, looking directly at him. That code is part of my personal toolset, Julian. The Federal Aviation Administration requires all personnel to pass a security review before being moved into shared infrastructure. You only need to send everything to me. I'll handle the review. Not a chance. That's what I said in my head. Out loud, I kept it light. That would violate regulations. I can't do that. Julian stood still for 3 seconds. Not angry, but definitely not pleased. It was the look of a man used to getting whatever he wants and realizing he just ran into a wall. He walked away without another word. But I knew. This wasn't over, and I was right. A few weeks earlier, the company sent me to an aviation conference in Chicago. I remembered that night clearly because I happened to see Julian in the hotel hallway his arm around a woman who was very much not Madison. The woman laughed loudly, and he leaned into her neck like a scene from a bargain bin drama. I turned away immediately, but Julian saw me. His expression tightened for a split second. I didn't comment, didn't care, didn't want to stick my head into anyone's private life, but clearly he thought differently. Turns out my silence was the problem. For people like Julian, secrets are what keep them awake at night. And from that moment on, the way he looked at me shifted. No longer the curiosity of a new executive, but the caution of someone afraid I might stab him in the back. The irony was that I had zero interest in stabbing anyone. He made that up entirely on his own. Madison, on the other hand, invented a different narrative. After seeing Julian snap at me once, she started watching me like I was seducing her fiancé with pulse core code. Every time I explained anything technical, she whispered to an intern that Avery has dark energy and disrupts the team vibe. I always thought lines like that only existed in movies. Turns out real life is even more ridiculous. Within 3 weeks, Madison pulled Julian into a full-on team purification. They fired 3 senior operators, people who could run pulse core in their sleep, and replaced them with interns from Julian's breakthrough program. One kid called himself a data specialist, but had only finished an online Excel course. One girl preferred filming TikToks over reviewing logs. Another guy kept asking if PulseCore supported voice control. PulseCore stayed quiet for a few days. Then it began reacting to the collective incompetence. Minor alerts popped up. A small sync error, a half-second routing delay. I fixed everything, but it felt like trying to stamp out embers in a forest that was already bone dry. Julian and Madison didn't see any of it. They only saw that I looked tired and assumed tired meant weak. They started compiling what they called evaluation records, logging every time I disagreed with a change, every email where I warned about risks, turning me into the opposition, when all I was doing was preventing them from turning PulseCore into a scrapyard. One afternoon, while I was recalibrating phase cycles, Madison stood behind me with her hands on her hips. She spoke in a voice dipped in spiritual honey. "Avery, you're attracting too much negative energy. I think you should reassess how you influence the team culture." I turned to her. "Madison, I'm trying to keep airplanes from hitting each other. The energy here runs on math, not crystals." She froze for a second, then walked off with the expression of someone who had just confirmed I was the resident dark force of the room. Julian was calmer, which made him far more dangerous. He limited my access to technical meetings, examined every report I submitted as if hunting for mistakes. And one day, while I was fixing another intern-created bug, I looked up and understood. He didn't want me here anymore, not because I was incompetent, but because I knew too much. About him, about PulseCore, and about the stupid decisions he was steering the airline toward. The match had been struck. No one else noticed. But I did, and it only needed the slightest wind to ignite. I have always believed. The most important meetings in any company never start with an obvious sign that they matter. There are no drums, no alarms. They begin with tiny details, like an email invite sent at 10 p.m., or the meeting room door taking a second longer than usual to close. And that morning, when Chief Executive Cross sent an urgent summons to every key leader, I knew the bad day had arrived. Skybridge's boardroom sat on the 7th floor, behind wide glass panes facing the runway. From there, you could watch planes lift, descend, pivot through the crosswinds, the whole motion looking like a perfect choreography only insiders ever understood. But the room itself felt as cold as a courtroom. A long wooden table, sleek black chairs, white light, and air still enough to hear the breath of the most anxious person in the room. Chief Executive Cross sat at the head, still sharp at nearly 70. The kind of man who spent decades making decisions worth hundreds of millions and learned to hide emotion behind gray, steady eyes. But I saw something different. That morning, he sat slightly off-center, his gaze lowered like a man trying to convince himself the meeting would unfold exactly as planned. The plan Julian had been feeding him for weeks. Julian entered full of confidence, laptop under his arm. Madison followed, dragging a small suitcase stuffed with all her presentation props. The neon pink peeking from the zipper alone made me want to walk out. But I stayed because if I left the room now, they would turn my absence into evidence of non cooperation. Madison set up her laptop, connected the projector, then turned back with the smile of someone ready to drop a glitter bomb inside a heart surgery. Everyone, today we introduce Elevation Shift, a new chapter, a new culture, a new vibration. The slide popped onto the screen, neon pink so bright I had to squint. Only 2 lines of text. Reduce the operations crew by 40%. Elevate system vibration. The room froze. A technical director beside me swallowed hard, the sound sharp as a trapped bird beating its wings. Madison launched into her speech. We are being pulled down by old energy. The ops team is too heavy, too focused on procedures, not open to innovation. If we remove 40% of traditional operators, we free higher frequencies and unleash natural creativity. That was the moment I could not stay quiet. I raised my hand. She paused, raising her brows like I was about to ask for a meditation schedule. I said, if you cut 40% of the ops team, you lose real time data handling. The Federal Aviation Administration requires a minimum of 4 people per shift for routing oversight, and PulseCore's cycle control requires 2 operators per phase. Lose bodies, lose rhythm. And lose rhythm here means, yes, your planes will be parked across the taxiways like Black Friday shoppers. The room stirred. Chief Executive Cross glanced at Julian. Julian smiled thinly, the smile of someone pretending to understand what they absolutely do not. Madison folded her arms. Avery, you're thinking very old. You're limiting the team's vision. If we elevate the vibration, everything flows smoothly. You know the saying, thought creates reality. I looked at her. My voice was completely calm. Airplane reality is created by radar, not vibration. Phase cycles are created by code, not affirmations. The reality of this airline is created by operators, not the color of a slide. Another director muttered quietly. Avery has a point. If we cut too deep, we won't have enough people online. Julian slammed his laptop on the table just a little too hard. We are not here to repeat the past. We are here to build the future, and the future needs flexibility, not stubbornness. He stared directly at me when he said stubbornness. I felt the shift in the room. Julian now saw me as a threat. He hated being questioned, hated when hard data cracked the narrative he was constructing. I have never been afraid of being disliked. What I fear are people who love their stories more than the safety of airplanes. Chief Executive Cross sighed. He spoke with the tone of someone trying to appear neutral, but already leaning toward his son without realizing it. I believe the younger generation understands the new trends. I think we should try a fresh approach. We cannot cling to the old model forever. He said the words, but his eyes did not meet mine. They stayed on that neon slide as if he were trying to convince himself it represented the future instead of recklessness. I understood. I understood so deeply it hit my spine like ice. I had no allies left in the room. The meeting ended with Julian's final declaration. Elevation shift would begin next week, and I watched every face leaving the room. Each one tightened like they were stepping into a cable car whose wires had already started to rust. I gathered my papers and rose to leave, but when I turned around, Julian was still seated. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick black folder. Performance evaluation files. Files about me. He placed it on the HR director's desk, the only other person still in the room. Process this. His voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut skin. I didn't stay to hear more. I walked out into the hallway, gripping my own folder, and finally understood. The real fight had just begun. I walked out of the boardroom feeling like someone who had just stepped out of a courtroom where the verdict had been written long before the trial began. No one said it outright, but the way Julian placed my file on the HR desk said everything. I had been in this industry long enough to hear the things people never speak. And the loudest thing I heard that day was the tick of a countdown clock. I returned to the System Operations Center, powered up PulseCore, and watched the red and green lines crawl across the black screen. Everything still ran, still followed its familiar 6-phase rhythm like an old, loyal heart, patient and predictable. I suddenly felt more responsible for this creature than for the people running the airline. And because of that, I had to make a decision I had never considered before. If they wanted to throw me off the ship, fine, but I would not let them pretend the ship could steer itself. That afternoon, I started gathering what others had dismissed as random code, and I called it what it really was: intellectual property. For 12 years, every time the system jammed, because the original contractor had overlooked something, I wrote a bridge, a patch, a shortcut. Over time, those pieces interconnected like auxiliary arteries, keeping PulseCore flexible where its core stayed rigid. The thing was, on paper, those tools belonged to the individual user, not the official platform. The Federal Aviation Administration liked everything neat and documented. Anything outside that box fell under the category of personal workflow tools. So I did something simple. I put everything back into the box where it legally belonged. I logged in with my admin credentials and opened the configuration directories. My scripts were scattered across 3 servers, tucked into subfolders only I and the programmer who quit last year even knew existed. I gathered them into a new folder and named it plainly: User Avery Workflow. That directory was flagged as personal, meaning it was tied directly to my internal account. Per security policy, if my account were revoked, the folder and everything inside it would be removed from the operating environment. It sounded like a revenge plan. It wasn't. It was me following the same rules they signed. I didn't add anything. I didn't delete anything. I simply moved my work to the place it was supposed to live. While the system re-indexed its new structure, I opened the cycle monitor. PulseCore ran on a 6-phase loop: Phase 1 for input, Phase 2 for pre-processing, Phase 3 for routing, Phase 4 for crew scheduling, Phase 5 for ticketing sync, Phase 6 for storage and reset. Every 6 hours, the whole engine completed a full rotation, and after each rotation, it required a confirmation from the key user role, the person the system recognized as its operational owner. Not for show, but so federal investigators could trace responsibility if something went wrong. Since my 3rd year as chief coordinator, that person had always been me. If they removed that user without properly assigning a new one, PulseCore would look for personal directories with no valid owner, fail to validate them, and automatically detach every unclassified module not marked as official. In plain English, all the bridges I had written would simply vanish from the operational path. Not explode, not burn, just disappear. That was not sabotage. That was a safety feature. The Federal Aviation Administration did not want a terminated employee to have lingering control of a live system. They built that mechanism to protect airlines from unstable people. I was merely using it to show the company exactly what they had taken for granted. That night, I went home and dug through old files. I found what I needed in a yellowed folder: the 2013 Compliance Agreement, Personal Workflow Tools Agreement. 3 dense pages stating that any custom tool created to optimize daily work belonged to the individual unless formally transferred through a certified audit. No one had ever done that process with me, because no one had ever thought those lines of code mattered. I wrote a note on top, read Clause 4, Section B. Then I scanned it, emailed one copy to myself and one to a lawyer I knew from a federal aviation case years ago. I didn't add any explanation. I just sent it, not as a threat, as a reminder that this time I would not walk out empty-handed. The next day, a new face appeared in the System Operations Center. He introduced himself as Troy, a young programmer from Julian's breakthrough program. Hoodie, Bluetooth earbuds, bright eyes, the look of someone who genuinely enjoyed code, which reduced my annoyance with the project by maybe 1%. Troy sat beside me for an hour, watching me work, then asked softly, "Avery, I noticed some scripts in the logs running under your user ID, but they're not in the official registry. What are those?" I answered honestly. "Those are the bridges that keep PulseCore from having an asthma attack every Thursday. Don't touch them. If you stay long enough to understand the system, you'll see why." He nodded, though I saw the conflict in his eyes. Curiosity on one side, ambition to impress Julian on the other hand. He wasn't old enough in this field to know that some things should never be touched too early if you want the airline to stay alive. 2 days later, I received an email from HR. The subject sounded gentle, like a Sunday noon. Discussion about career direction. Time, Friday, 3 o'clock. Location, HR office, third floor. No need to bring anything. I reread the last sentence. No need to bring anything. The only thing you never need to bring into that room is hope. I closed the notification, leaned back, and stared at the blinking green text across PulseCore's screen. One more six-phase cycle would be completed at 3:25 that afternoon. If they were going to do anything, they would do it before the next loop began. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't try to stop a storm. I just sat there, calm as a chess player who knows a piece is about to fall, and also knows that when it does, it will take the whole board with it. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of silence everyone in aviation recognizes. Too quiet. When things get so still you can hear the air conditioner humming, it means something bad is coming. I checked the time, 2:57. I stood, grabbed my coat, and locked PulseCore like I did every day. No one knew this was the last time I would ever do it as an employee. The HR office was on the third floor, down a hallway that felt like a morgue. I stepped inside, and of course Julian and Madison were already seated with Linda from HR. They had picked the smallest room, the one with the fewest windows and the lowest chair waiting for me. Classic. When I walked in, Julian looked up with a half-sympathetic, half-satisfied stare. "Avery, thanks for coming," he said, in a tone people usually use when thanking someone for bringing donuts to a meeting, not when preparing to fire them. I replied, "What's the issue?" Linda opened a folder. She used the voice every HR department in the country must be trained in. "We invited you to discuss your alignment with the company's new transformation direction." Madison cut in immediately, unable to wait for her turn. "You do not harmonize with the team's energy. You create a negative atmosphere. You refuse to support me with PulseCore training. And you did not transfer knowledge for the Luminova project." I looked at Madison for a few seconds. I did not speak to her. I turned to Julian instead. "Knowledge transfer. You sure about that, Julian?" A simple question, but it made him shift. Not because I raised my voice, because I hit the exact nerve he was afraid of. He needed me to sign off that everything had been properly handed over, and he also wanted me gone right now. Those two goals did not coexist. He knew it. I knew it. And what bothered him most was how calm I was. Julian forced a smile. "Avery, you refuse to provide your custom code. You are not aligned with our innovation culture." I lowered my tone, which somehow made the words sharper. "I follow federal aviation rules. You wanted me to break them. That is all." Madison shot up from her chair, face flushing like someone had crushed her emotional windpipe. This. This is exactly what I mean. Negativity, disconnection. She always has this hostile energy. She drags the whole room's frequency down. I looked at Linda. She looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Julian slid a stack of papers toward me. "You are terminated effective immediately for failing to support the transformation spirit. 2 weeks of pay, standard confidentiality agreement. Sign it now, and everything stays smooth." I did not even bother glancing at the packet. I removed my badge from its lanyard. It was old, cracked in one corner, but it had taken me through thousands of security checkpoints and unlocked millions of lines of PulseCore data. I spun it once and placed it on the table in front of him. No severance, no confidentiality. Madison blinked fast, stunned that I turned down money. But Julian understood instantly. Refusing severance meant I was not bound to silence. That bothered him, and he could not take it back. I turned to leave. No one tried to say goodbye. Linda whispered something about returning equipment. I did not stop. The door clicked shut behind me with a small sound that felt like a rope being cut. Outside, Denver was cold and dry, sunlight sharp as needles in my eyes. I stood on the concrete steps, drew a long breath, and opened my phone. The internal admin app still showed a green icon. I tapped it. The screen displayed, "Session active. User Avery. Terminate session." I pressed yes. The system asked again, like a final ceremony for a relationship longer than several marriages I had watched fall apart. I pressed yes. The screen dimmed. Status, disconnected. And that was it. The bridge between PulseCore and the code that kept it breathing was gone. I had not broken anything. I had simply closed the door after walking out. The rest was up to the system. But nothing would collapse immediately. Pulse core was old but stubborn. It would try to keep running. It would slow down. It would misfire. It would send those early warnings the way a sick person coughs before the fever arrives. And at some point in the next few hours, it would realize its keeper was gone. I left the building, crossed the parking lot, and never looked back. I did not want to see the face of whoever would be running after me 3 hours later. I wanted to see something else, their consequences. The bar I chose sat near the airport, the kind pilots went to after night shifts. High altitude tavern. I walked in, took the first stool at the counter. The bartender looked at me and nodded like he already knew the story. Tequila, he asked. The cheapest, I said. Let it burn. He poured it, slid the glass to me. I drank it fast enough that my throat flinched. I opened my phone and checked Flight Watch. Yellow dots represent aircraft. A few started slowing. A few showed minor alerts. Nothing dramatic yet. But I knew what waited behind it. I leaned my elbow against the bar, watching the map of American airspace glow under dim lights. And I was not hoping for the system to collapse. I was waiting for the moment when the people who believed they did not need me finally understood how wrong they were. The world does not crack in one violent second. It slips one beat at a time, and PulseCore was about to miss its first. I sat in the bar with my fingertip tapping lightly on the flight watch screen, watching the yellow dots drift across the airspace. Something familiar rose in my chest. Not guilt, not satisfied, but the instinct of someone with many years in the field is to feel a storm forming long before the clouds appear. On the first day PulseCore loses its keeper, it does not scream. It groans. And that groan begins with something only an operator would notice. Flight 7128 out of Salt Lake City is shifting its timeline by 2 minutes. 2 minutes. If you are a passenger, you do not care. If you are a pilot, you raise a brow. But if you are someone like me, you know it is a heartbeat slipping one beat off rhythm. Most systems would ignore it. PulseCore never drifts without a reason. I took a sip of tequila and watched that dot crawl slightly slower than it should. Then the second small alert popped up. Phase refresh initiated. I straightened. The 6-phase loop was running. PulseCore was reaching the point where it would look for the key user role to validate the custom bridges. I knew exactly what would happen. I just did not expect it to happen this fast. On screen, the status line blinked. Authentication request pending. Then, authentication failed. No rhythm keeper found. No account found. No priority permissions to maintain auxiliary modules. Right after that, I watched the internal configuration paths begin to gray out. The scripts I had written were removed from the loop like planks pulled out of a bridge in total silence. No explosion. No smoke. Just absence, exactly as the Federal Aviation Rules designed it. And the moment those pieces dropped out of place, the dominoes began their fall. The first step was duplicate gate assignment. Flight 6601 from Phoenix was directed to Gate B20, while Gate B20 had already been assigned to Flight 554 from Reno. Both planes were descending at the same time. Pilots called the radio, asking the system. The system responded with outdated info. Suddenly, two crews believed they had landing rights to the same gate. Without ground crew intervention, that becomes an accident. But the ground crew only heard shouting on the radio. B-20 is occupied. Pull back. Pull back now. Before that was settled, the second error hit. Crew assignment wiped. Crew lists for 7 flights disappeared. A Seattle flight suddenly had attendance from a Dallas rotation. No one knew where they were supposed to be. I could picture the chaos in the crew control room. Pilots yelling. Coordinators slamming keyboards. Boarding gates flipping like a giant deck of cards thrown into the air. Then PulseCore did the worst possible thing. It generated 2 identical flight identifiers. 2 flights, same number, 9823, same departure time, same route. The Federal Aviation Administration has one term for that condition: collision risk. When identifiers duplicate, radar cannot tell which is real and which is a shadow. The automated safety system flags red immediately and sends alerts to the control tower. That alone is enough. The storm began to spin. Taxiways clogged. Aircraft lined up like highway traffic on Thanksgiving weekend. Pilots furious. stuck on the ground with no explanation. The system was half alive, half dead. Julian's Luminova could make pretty infographics, but it could not solve a single real error. The first person to break was not a pilot or a manager. It was Madison. A live stream notification lit up on the corner of my phone. I did not open it, but the bar did it for me. People murmured. A tech at the back table turned his volume up. Madison was crying on TikTok. She said the airline was under bad energy. She apologized because the frequencies were disrupted. She begged viewers to send healing thoughts to PulseCore. I nearly choked on my tequila. Her live stream did not last 5 minutes before the internet shredded her. Comments hit like a hailstorm. What kind of cultural innovation blocks every plane? Does raising vibration fix flight delays? Do you even know what the Federal Aviation Administration is? TikTok rarely grants mercy, and Madison had thrown herself straight into its jaws. I saw the CNN logo flash on the corner screen of the bar. The anchor spoke with that particular calm reserved for very bad news. Skybridge Air is facing a potential complete operational freeze. The Federal Aviation Administration confirms it is considering a ground stop. A second later, a banner jumped across FlightWatch. One by one, the yellow dots turned red. Then the line Julian never wanted to see appeared. Federal Aviation Administration ground stop. All Skybridge Air flights. The entire airline is frozen. Not a single wheel lifted off the ground. Julian reacted instantly. I knew because Mike kept sending messages nonstop. IT is screaming at each other. Julian blames the old system. The new kids say scripts vanished. Everyone is yelling. Madison is curled up, crying. Chief Executive Cross is on his way. I replied with one sentence. The system is not old. They are. Right after that, another message arrived from someone I never expected. A young technician whom Julian had once praised endlessly. The message was so short, it almost made me laugh. Avery. The system is dead. Really dead. I set my phone down and signaled the bartender for more tequila. He did not ask why. My face probably said everything. All my life, I have watched things fall apart, but nothing has ever collapsed as cleanly, as logically, as what PulseCore was doing now. It did not fail because of me. It failed because they decided they were smarter than the past. And every system, like every human being, has a limit. Skybridge had finally crossed it. When the Federal Aviation Administration issued the ground stop, Skybridge Air's world didn't collapse quietly anymore. It blew apart like a tire hitting a nail at full speed on the interstate. Loud, burnt, and impossible to salvage. Mike texted me at 6:30. Chief Executive Cross just landed his private jet straight at headquarters. The man rarely cut short a weekend trip, but a federal ground stop leaves no one sitting still. The emergency meeting began in the crisis operations room. Rushed to the point Madison hadn't even fixed the mascara streaks from her live stream. I wasn't there, but Mike narrated it like a war correspondent. Cross stood at the head of the table, silver hair trembling with anger. On the giant screen was the red system alert showing PulseCore had failed to locate its key user role and had removed all personal modules under federal regulation. He turned to Julian and asked the one question every competent leader asks when everything is on fire. Why is there no rhythm keeper for the system? Julian stuttered. First, he pointed at the screen like he could strangle the code. Then he took a breath and delivered the line that Mike swore made the entire room silently choke on their own laughter. Avery sabotaged us. She is a saboteur. I heard it while still sitting in the bar because Mike video called me instantly. I watched Julian's blurry face on screen, hands shaking as he tried to regain control. But Cross wasn't a fool. He had seen enough reports to know PulseCore never self-destructs unless a regulation triggers it. And he also knew who approved that regulation. He and his son. Cross spoke slowly, clearly, cold as ice. Avery did not sabotage anything. The system did exactly what federal law requires. If you fire the operator without a proper handover, the system automatically protects personal data. This is a regulation, not failure. Julian refused to back down. He raised his voice. She did it on purpose, Dad. She knew. And she didn't tell us. She kept tools to use against us. I switched on the speaker and spoke loud enough for the whole room to hear. I did not sabotage anything. I followed the contract you signed, Julian. Clause 4. Section B of the 2013 agreement. Personal tools belong to the creator and are removed when the user leaves the system. If you want to sue me, start by suing federal policy first. There were about 3 seconds of silence on the other end. Mike said, Cross put a hand over his face, like a man realizing he had raised a son far too arrogant for far too long. Madison, ever the loudest supporting villain, jumped in instantly. She screamed into the phone as if I were in the room. You have to stop this right now. My lawyer will send you a notice for sabotage, for damaging team frequency, and for harming the brand. I smiled. A lawsuit threat from an influencer sounded more like a skincare ad than legal action. I replied briefly. Madison, the Federal Aviation Administration, does not investigate frequency. They investigate data, and the data shows the company triggered its own security protocol. Your lawyer may want to read the statute before threatening anyone. Julian pushed again, now with a threat. Avery, if you do not return and fix the system, we will sue you for financial damages, tens of millions. Do not think you can escape. I leaned back against the bar stool, nudged my foot, and felt the relaxed satisfaction of someone watching a movie they had already seen the ending of. I answered slowly. If I return, I have to sign the liability acceptance. That means admitting sabotage. I did not sabotage, so I will not return. And if you sue me, the court will demand proof of the termination procedure. And if that procedure caused the system to lose its key user role without replacement, who is at fault? Me or the person who signed the decision? The room went quiet as if I had pulled the power cord. Madison slumped. Julian locked his jaw, and Cross stared at the table like a man realizing the company wasn't attacked from outside. It was gutted from within by arrogance and incompetence. News alerts began pouring like a flood. Skybridge stock dropped straight down like a stone thrown into a lake. CNN flashed a bold headline. Skybridge Air is under federal investigation. Nepotism concerns rise. Financial outlets dissected every detail of Julian's lack of real-world experience despite holding a critical role. Madison's name appeared on entertainment sites under the caption, Influencer Sparks Panic Livestream During Airline Meltdown. The Federal Aviation Administration summoned the airline to a formal federal inquiry. Not the friendly kind, the kind where you bring lawyers. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from Mike, former coworkers, even people who had only ever nodded at me in hallways. All short, all frantic. Avery, the system is dead. Avery, they are asking where you are. Avery, I don't know what to do. I replied to Mike with one sentence. Do not sync with them. Get out now. 30 minutes later, amid the chaos, people in the bar were watching like a championship game, and I received an email from Eagle West Airlines, an old conservative carrier. No flash, no hype, the kind that values competence above everything. Their email was only a few lines. Avery, we are monitoring the situation. We would like to offer you the role of Director of Integrated Systems, triple Skybridge salary, full authority over technical architecture, and we guarantee no nepotism, no influencers, no one is standing above the experts. I reread it 3 times, not for the money, for the last line, no nepotism, no influencers. In 12 years, no one had ever said that to me sincerely. I responded without hesitation, I accept. And I added one last line, not as a threat, but as a promise to myself for why I refuse to go down with a sinking ship. I work where the competent are protected and the incompetent do not stand over them. If you keep that promise, I will keep mine. I hit send, then set my phone down and asked for another tequila. This time I drank slowly, letting the burn settle through my chest like a quiet celebration. Outside, Denver was sinking into evening light, and somewhere in that distant glass building, Julian was probably watching the world he thought he controlled melt straight through his fingers. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel angry. I did not feel regret. I just felt light. Light the way someone feels after cutting the final rope tying them to a ship already sinking to the bottom. 3 days after the ground stop buried Skybridge in chaos, I stepped onto an Eagle West Boeing 787 with a feeling I could barely name. Not joy, not triumph, not sadness. It felt like someone finally stepping onto the shore after swimming too long in cold water. I just wanted to breathe. Seat 14A window side. A flight to Seattle, where Eagle West's technical headquarters sits right by the shoreline, staring toward the snow capped Cascades. The captain spoke over the speakers with the calm tone you only hear at airlines run by people who actually know what they are doing. I fastened my seatbelt, slid my bag beneath the seat, and glanced outside. Afternoon sunlight pierced the cloud layer, laying gold streaks across the wing like someone had dusted metal with powdered amber. I looked down at Denver's runway, the place that had held nearly all my adult years. The Eagle West aircraft began to taxi, and it hit me. This was the first time I sat in a passenger seat without worrying about what was breaking behind the system's curtain. I was no longer keeping rhythm for a company. I was no longer responsible for anyone. The feeling was strange. The screen in front of me blinked on with the news. I didn't intend to watch, but Skybridge Air flashed across the first headline, and I couldn't look away. Julian Cross suspended from all duties pending federal investigation. Madison Hale shuts down all social media after public backlash over crisis livestream. Skybridge Air enters negotiations to sell itself to a low-cost conglomerate. Not one line mentioned me. I was relieved. I didn't want to be a headline. I only wanted to walk away from a place that had taken more than a decade of my life. The plane turned toward the runway, engines humming through their steady rise. I leaned back, hearing the familiar vibration echo beneath my feet. But this time I was just a passenger, not the person holding chaos together behind PulseCore's walls. When the wheels left the ground, the city shrank into something small and harmless. Sunlight spilled through the window, warm and soft enough to make me squint. For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. The plane banked slightly, and at that moment, I saw something on the far corner of the airport that halted my breath for half a second. An old Skybridge Airbus, its engines removed, its fuselage being hauled by a tow truck toward the maintenance hangar. It looked like an old bird with its wings stripped, being dragged home after losing the ability to fly. I used to keep it flying. I used to keep all of them flying, and now they were being pulled away like chapters of a book no one bothered to bookmark before closing. The captain came over the speakers right then. His voice was steady and warm. We would also like to express our thanks to a special passenger on today's flight, Avery Morales, who recently supported our technical team in configuring several new operational procedures. We are very glad to welcome her to Eagle West. A few passengers glanced around for me. I only gave a small shrug and a faint smile. Not out of pride, but because that sentence was the final confirmation I needed. I had walked out at exactly the right moment. The aircraft climbed into layers of white cloud. Sunlight mixed with moisture, turning into a shimmering band along the wing. I stared out at it and thought about everything. PulseCore, the System Operations Center, the sleepless nights, the chaos, the people I helped, the people who pushed me down, and even the ones who never understood. They were sitting on a plane, and I kept from falling. I closed my eyes. No anger, no regret, no turning back. Just one final thought, light as the way PulseCore collapsed the moment it lost its keeper. I did not bring the airline down. I simply stepped out, and the space I left behind showed them who truly held the sky.